is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today, I'm joined by yet another panel of experts. Ruling Elder Billy Ball of Birmingham Briarwood Presbyterian Church, Job Dalomba of Christ Covenant Church in Woodstock, and Teaching Elder Ben Dunson. Ben, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself? This is your first time on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I do a variety of things. Right now, I'm a stated supply at a PCA church in Northeast Texas, in Paris, Texas, and I also serve part-time as a professor of New Testament at Greenville Seminary, and then I am a contributing editor to American Reformer. And I do writing for them and editorial work for them. And so it's a journal that is geared towards a lot of the cultural issues in society, politics, culture, and things like that, but also ways in which that touches on the church. So I've been able to do some PCA coverage in that capacity.
Yes, I've seen some of the coverage you've done for the PCA. Recently, you had an article about the David French affair, and I thought that was one of the best. It was very measured, clear, lots of great resources for the concern that this wasn't just the mob coming with pitchforks, but they were real legitimate theological concerns. So thank you for that article. And you're going to be doing some coverage of the General Assembly when it convenes next week. Would you tell me about the American Reformers' work there?
Right. So we'll be doing some podcasting during the week and interviewing different people just to get their takes on the General Assembly, and then there'll be some writing on that as well, just to kind of do a recap of what's going on and how the Assembly is going. So we'll be trying to keep in touch with all the developments at General Assembly.
And where can people find that podcast? Will it be YouTube, Podbean? What should they search for?
So I know, just the kind of the standard Apple podcasts. That's
Great.
probably the best way to get access to it. I mean, you can get to it on the site AmericanReformer.org as well. I will also say this: we haven't published this yet, but we're also going to have a social event. We're doing a joint social event with Grimke Seminary at General Assembly, and so we're going to start posting things for that for anyone who's interested in coming and being a part of that. So there'll be an RSVP for that. That'll be Wednesday night. We've managed to get it right after the GRN dinner and right before more in their event. So if you want to cram yourself in there for about an hour to show up, you'll be able to do all three at the same time, in the same evening.
A very full evening for sure. And so if people search on Apple Podcast, American Reform Podcast, that's where they can find your General Assembly coverage. Thank you for doing that. And Billy Ball, on the subject of the More Dinner, you are the founder of the Ruling Elder Network, and I believe a co-sponsor of the More Dinner. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I, like you said before, live in Birmingham, Alabama, ruling elder at Briarwood Church, and really got personally engaged. Been engaged, of course, at Briarwood, and by God's grace, my family and we moved around earlier in my life and was able to be on the session of a couple of smaller churches, one in Lilburn, Georgia, one in Gulfport, Mississippi, before before the Lord moved us to Birmingham, which has been home for over 20 years now. But yes, I'm involved with the Ruling Elder Network, and we can talk some more about that, as well as have really enjoyed developing a relationship with Charlie Nave and the folks at more in the PCA, and with my music expert friend Brad Isbell, and I have greatly enhanced my understanding of good music by being associated a little bit with Brad. And
because you know what good music is not. Is that?
Yeah, well, it's certainly an experience. I'll tell you that. It wakes you up when you start a Presbycast. You're just always amazed, and that's a good thing. We always want to be amazed.
So what was it that what was the impetus behind the Ruling Elder Network?
Well,
We've seen great increases in the Ruling Elder participation over the last 5 or 6
yeah,
years.
yeah.
I think
So
there's
yeah, so this all started. I had a pretty lengthy career um, in the utility business, and that was by God's grace and sweet provision, was able to exit that at an earlier age back in 2019. And of course, right after I exited that career, COVID showed up, and was able to spend a good bit of time at home, and then also allowed me, because I traveled quite a bit before that, allowed me to really look into things that I had always had an interest in, which was like attending presbytery meetings on a regular basis. And then the thought of taking a week and going to General Assembly. And really, the first assembly I attended was in 21. I was planning on going to the 2021, right, in
so that
Birmingham.
that
Well,
was and that was the St. Louis Assembly 21.
yes, yes, the one that seemed like it would never end.
So it may be you and Job, since Job joined the PCA and since you started attending General Assembly, the trajectory
Yeah,
has
yeah,
shifted somewhat.
yeah.
You
That's
have
a
Um,
you
fair
two to thank
assessment.
for it. So
yeah,
Yeah,
but
you're
I tell
welcome.
you, it really kind of started when my pastor at the time, Harry Reeder, we were talking, having conversations, and he had a real, as many men did at that time, especially coming off of, I think, the Dallas GA, had a real desire to see more ruling elder participation. And I remember we had a couple of lunch meetings, and Harry can be a pretty, or could could be a pretty convincing fellow, but we had lots of great conversations. And he had this idea of, we just need to really find ways to remove some of the mystery of being involved in some of the higher courts by ruling elders out there. And if you look back on some of the data, of course, everybody knows the first General Assembly, there were more REs and there were TEs, but that was really the only one like that, as the number of churches quickly escalated that are part of the PCA. Uh, you saw the numbers fall down to where you would have almost a 60-40 split between teaching elders, few more teaching elders than ruling elders. But as the years went on and then churches were added and churches grew and the number of teaching elders grew, you saw that participation decline to kind of the low 30%, high 20s as far as GA attendance. And it stuck in that area for quite a number of years. And then interestingly enough, if you look at the data, and I know in 2008, by what I looked at, you saw kind of a drop. And I don't know if it was, you could come up with all kind of reasons why. And the numbers started falling down into the mid 20%, then kind of the low 20% of total population of commissioners at GA being ruling elders, and kind of bottomed out at around 21%, really for 3 GAs in a row. That was 16, 17, and 18. And so it was, and there was a slight increase in 19 in Dallas, but really the numbers started to come up again in St. Louis as the issues that we were beginning to wrestle with that were quite significant. And so as Harry was talking with me, we started having this conversation. How can we just do something fairly simple to really get the word out to ruling elders? And one of the first steps was in September of 21, there was a meeting, I think the GRN, the Gospel Reformation Network, put together, called a Meeting of Concerned Presbyterians in Greenville, South Carolina. Ryan, I think you may have been there. And I don't remember if you were there or not.
I don't think I was tall enough. I think was the issue
okay. And so basically, to be honest, all I did at that meeting, we made a little brief announcement. and I just put some pieces of paper on the tables at lunch. I said, if you're interested, give me your email address. And that's kind of where it started. And after that, we had started several Zoom calls really geared at, how can we get more people engaged at Presbyterian level, at General Assembly, more ruling elders engaged? What's holding them back? And a lot of it's pretty simple stuff. It's just providing a little information. And a lot of times it's just giving somebody coming alongside of a friend and giving them a little encouragement.
Yeah.
Because no matter what you do, and I saw this in my career, if you're unsure or you don't understand the language sometimes, and if you're just uncomfortable, sometimes it's enough for somebody just to say, I'm gonna let somebody else handle that. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, in the case of Briarwood Church, you had some wonderful men who had so faithfully gone to Presbytery meetings and General Assemblies for years, and they were just getting to the point in their life, just age-wise, where that just wasn't possible anymore. And I know even
Tom
at
Lippert, I'm
Briarwood.
sure, is one of those that
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
legend on the floor.
yeah, we had actually a whole group of men, who were, I mean, they just never missed. And so even at Briarwood, we had to develop kind of a set of guys who could kind of follow in their footsteps. And really that's all REN was about. And so we still have a Zoom call and every now and then, and have a list of probably 300 ruling elders on an email list. If somebody wants to be on that list, just send me a quick email at WO Ball at rulingeldernetwork.com. I'll add you to the email list. And we had one several weeks ago where Brother Fred Greco was on there. We kind of allow him to attend as being an ex-ruling elder. And, we discussed upcoming GA, talked about some overture issues, other issues. And it's just a great time for guys to get together. But you're right. We did begin to see a kick up. The numbers went up a little bit in St. Louis. We got to like 29% ruling elders. But by the time you hit Birmingham, we got over 30%, 31%.
Yeah.
And I think, the attendance of ruling elders and their focus and really made a difference. And then last year in Memphis, we were still a little bit over 30% of the population. I'd love to see that again this year. We'll kind of have to see. I think the overall attendance sounds like it's going to be similar to Memphis, because I personally would like to see going forward the number of REs at least in the low to mid 30s. That would kind of be a personal goal of mine. But I'm so thankful that folks have really stepped up.
It's been wonderful to see ruling elders become more and more involved because there's that huge learning curve.
Yes.
That you get there. I mean, I was attending General Assembly while I was in seminary. The church where I was an intern, they said, Ryan, we can't pay for your lodging, but we will pay you. We won't make you take vacation. If you just want to go to GA just to watch and learn, we're happy to do that. And I think once they got their debt retired, now they will pay the expenses of their interns as well, because they realize this is an important thing for teaching elders. But there's really no corresponding equipping for ruling elders. And so to have just a time for ruling elders to come together and hear the issues explained and talked about, and to know the procedures, that's a huge advantage.
Ryan, and that's one of the great things that more in the PCA has brought to the table by saying, especially to men, maybe at smaller churches. I know at Briarwood, if you're an RE and you've been the session has appointed you a commissioner, the church will cover your expenses. But I realize, especially a lot of smaller churches, that might be a struggle. And more has just done a great job of making scholarships, in a sense, available to help people offset their expenses. So I give more just a lot of credit for that. They also produced a series of videos. This has been a couple of years ago now, where Fred Greco and Dominic Aquilo just talked about things, tried to take some of the mystery out. Like you said, help lessen the slope of that learning curve, make it a little easier. The other thing we did, we were able to first do this in Birmingham, and the logistics in Birmingham were just perfect for this. It was so convenient. We said, like Ben mentioned, they're going to have a social gathering. Well, he said, let's just have a social gathering for ruling elders. No seminary degree required. and we had a great gathering. I didn't know how many people were going to come. I was thinking maybe 200. I think we quit counting at like 400. And I was praying that the barbecue, it would be like feeding the thousands, with the fishes and the loaves, that the barbecue would, make it. And by God's grace, it did. And then, of course, last year in Memphis, the folks at the Rendezvous Restaurant were so kind to us and let us use their place. And what a great event. And of course, we had to expand the invitation to Zach Groff so he could sing. And so this year, as Ben mentioned, we're working with more in the PCA, and Charlie has really done most of the work this year because it's closer to his home territory. And we'll be at the Commonwealth Club after the GRN dinner later that evening. And Zach has promised to, attend and to share with us maybe some new music. I don't know if it's any better, but it's new. And so I would just invite everybody, if you're going to come, I do ask that you go to Eventbrite. You can just type in Ruling Elder Shindig, and it should come up. You need to get yourself a ticket. Make sure it's the proper one, more in the PCA on Wednesday evening, as Ben mentioned, down the street at the Commonwealth Club.
And jackets are required for that one, I
yeah,
understand.
that's unfortunate, but like I said, trying to find a place to hold these things has gotten more complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, just find a jacket or borrow a teaching elder's jacket. I mean, they're not going to need it at that time of night. So,
and Ben, how can people find your event? It was not a shindig, but
Right. So there will be info when we start putting this on social media, probably today, actually. It's at the headquarters of Grimke in Richmond, so it's very convenient, which is within walking distance of the event center. Yeah, but there'll be info posted on Twitter, and then yeah, I mean, you could look up Grimke as well and find that.
All right. Well, let's thank you. Let's dive into our discussion of General Assembly topics. This was, some people have said this is going to be not a very eventful assembly. I've been saying this is going to be a very significant assembly in terms of our polity, our procedure, and our personnel. But Ben, would you just walk us through? We had that kerfuffle about the cancellation of an event, and my understanding was they had planned a different event dealing with ministers who had rejected Social Security, but there was a proposal in Congress to allow them to come back in, but that proposal died, and so the administrative committee was somewhat scrambling for an event, and they invited David French along with three eminently qualified teaching elders. I would have loved to hear from all three of them or any one of them. But you articulated some very important concerns about the propriety of David French coming. Can you articulate just a quick summary of why that was such an issue and such a regrettable decision?
Yes, I mean, David French has not made any secret of his political stances. I mean, he writes weekly, where he's very, very critical of a very large percentage of the evangelical church in their political engagement. Now, you might love David French, you might agree with his particular stance on all of that, but he's a very polarizing figure, and I think that might be putting it mildly. And this was this was put forward as a panel to help us deal with polarization. And I would think that in general, what we would want is to find ways to lessen polarization in the church. A figure like David French is, in my view, going to only increase polarization if he's there speaking. And he's made no secret with his political curriculum that he's developed with Curtis Chang and Russell Moore, that their goal is to push evangelicals in a certain direction, push them away from, and this is not a stump speech for Donald Trump, but to push them away from figures like Donald Trump and things like that. So he's made no secret of that. And I was very concerned with what that would actually do. I mean, it seemed like that would be creating a lot of strife, stirring up trouble. And so I wrote on that, and I wrote about my concerns. I have concerns with the specific views that David French holds about things like permitting drag queen story hour, and his view of how we should think about laws about transgenderism and parental rights and things like that. So there's a bunch of issues that I have really strong views about, but that wasn't really, I don't think, really the focus. You can disagree with me on those, but is at General Assembly, is that the time to be airing those grievances and kind of is that really going to meet the stated goal of that panel, which is to help us avoid polarization? I didn't think so.
Yeah, that was a good question. I had just, this person is so polarizing and has said so many uncharitable things in an uncharitable way. There are ways that you can articulate something and be charitable or be polarizing, and he seems to excel at saying it in the polarizing manner. So that kind of put a dent in the calm waters of sailing into General Assembly. Um, and then there's the prospect of this Korean style prayer, which I had no experience with, but I got an email from a recovering Baptist, and we have at least one recovering Baptist pastor on the show. Job, had you ever in one of the congregations you served practiced praying in stereo? Have you ever heard of that?
No, I don't know what
Okay.
that means.
Well, a friend of mine who was reared in Baptist circles in rural East Tennessee heard about this Korean style prayer, and he says, "Oh, well, we used to do that growing up. It's just where everybody prays at the same time, and the pastor's he hollers when it's time to wrap up." And so I don't think this is. I know teaching under Joseph Pipa expressed biblical and exegetical questions about the practice, and he was called a racist for doing so and threatened with discipline. But I don't think this is about ethnicity. I think this is about the propriety of what goes on in public worship.
Now that you say that, the only thing I can relate to is I went to my wife's parents are Assemblies of God, and when we were dating, I went to an evening service there, and they did something similar. They would just simply pray. It wasn't in tongues. It was just they prayed at will, and there wasn't really like a wait until someone's done, but it kind of was all at the same time. That's the closest I can understand.
Yeah.
For a 20-year-old college student, not reared in the church so much, and especially the Assemblies of God church, it was a little odd. But in hindsight, it was also in there essentially a prayer meeting. So that was the closest I've ever been to something like that. It was fine.
And that's something that there's a distinction between a prayer meeting and public worship. Well, let's look at, if it's okay with y'all, I'd like to look at one of the items of the previous overtures that we have to ratify or approve for the final time. This is item 3, which would modify the way confessions are handled. That if I confess some personal sin against someone, that the offended brother, the court would have to go to him and review that confession. And I think this is a needful common sense change. So that we've got two others that will come up. The item one deals with restricting the use of titles, pastor, elder, and deacon, to only ordained people. And item two, I think, is going to put to rest a lot of the discussion over character, requiring that chastity be defining in our character, convictions, and conduct as far as ordained officers. But this one hasn't gotten a lot of discussion. Have you all considered item three at all? The change to BCO 38.1 regarding confessions of sin, cases without process.
I haven't spoken to anyone about it past when we talked about it Presbyterian. We just voted to approve it.
Well, I just think this is. I think the PCA gets a lot of bad press for things, but I think this is something that we're doing that's a good idea. Making sure that if I confess a sin, I can confess things in broad and general things, and then the presbytery can approve that confession. And then if someone else comes along and says, "Well, you did." Yes, that's sort of broadly what you did, but here's the specific ways. The presbytery has very little recourse to come back and do further discipline. But now the offended party, the court is supposed to reach out to him or her and say, "Do you agree with this confession? Can you give us your thoughts on it?" So this is a needful, positive development.
Ryan, I kind of agree with Job. I haven't heard much conversation about this lately. All the conversation I did hear, especially last year, was positive, like you said, and obviously the votes have been exceedingly on the positive side. I think, though, just, you're talking about ruling elders and the learning curve about getting engaged with GA. One of the things we need to remind people about is giving the final approval of overtures or changes to the BCO. They had to go through and gain the vote of the presbyteries to get their 2/3 approval. That happens early on in the GA agenda.
Yes, that's usually Tuesday night.
Yeah, you need to be there. You don't need to be in the hall, because this is the time to come on in the room and be a part of the process to take these things across the finish line. I don't think any of the ones, I would be surprised if there were any issue with any of the three coming up. But you mentioned the overture or the change to the BCO regarding personal character, sexuality, these type things. I mean, that's important. We will. I'm confident of that. But don't let that moment pass by. That was what, 3 years in the making?
Yes.
And tremendous debate and conversation, and that'll be a vote I will be excited to cast.
Yes, a vote that may put to rest a lot of hard conversations.
I mean, it doesn't change the realities of the challenges of the world we're temporarily living in, but dealing with that issue and is an exciting thing for me.
Yes. Well, before we even get to vote on these items, these previous overtures for final ratification, we have to elect a moderator. Sometimes you have great speeches for the election of the moderator, and sometimes not so much. The highlight of moderatorial nominee speeches for me was definitely Birmingham. We had two great candidates and two great nominators. Is that the right word? Was Harry Reeder was nominating Mel Duncan, and Howie Donahoe was nominating John Baez, two superb candidates. Yeah. Although it will be hard to surpass David Strain's nomination speech for Fred Greco, where he just highlighted all of Teaching Elder Greco's qualifications for the office, and I think that's what we need to hear in a speech for a nominator, for a moderator. We don't need to hear about how the dead would vote, as we've heard in the past. We don't need to hear about what a great guy he is. We need to hear how much he loves Jesus, how much he loves the church, and how skilled he is at running meetings. Do y'all have any idea of who may be nominated this year?
Not a clue.
Same.
Yeah, I'm not going to wander into those waters, but I would totally agree with you, Ryan, on at least, I don't know about the past. I don't know about 20 years ago. When you consider the size of the assembly now
Mm.
and in some ways, the complexity and the scope and the range of the issues that are dealt with, the importance of having somebody uh, lead as a moderator who is skilled in navigating these complex meetings. And obviously, my buddy Fred just did a fantastic job. And in my opinion, that needs to be the priority on who is moderating the meeting. There are many fine men that we need to honor and be thankful to the Lord for. And I'm not against that, but I think for choosing a moderator going forward, we need to be focused on somebody that God has given the gifts of moderating.
And it does play into the need of godly character that is expected of an officer, because he has to be fair,
Mm.
and his own opinions on the subject should not weigh in how he moderates.
Amen.
And so the exemplary character does need to, in many ways, lead maybe the first thing as opposed to the main reason, but you say, yes, this man is someone who will be fair. His own opinions are set aside because he's here to moderate this meeting. But also, he has to be competent.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. And I think with some carefully placed callings of the question, we could the next moderator could perhaps beat Mr. Greco's record, but we'll see. Uh, meeting right now as we're recording is the Review of Presbytery Records Committee. So it's concluded now. By Faith, a reporter from By Faith was in the meeting, but my understanding is they've gone into closed session. They've allowed him to stay, but said nobody's allowed to give any updates about the Review of Presbytery Records meeting until Friday. So by the time this is out, we'll have those reports, but unfortunately, we don't have any updates. But there are a few matters that are coming back. Some of you may remember the Metro New York issue, where they had an Episcopalian priestess in the pulpit doing a teaching of some sort, and that was referred to the Judicial Commission. And one of the things that the Judicial Commission said was that the presbytery shall complete its work in dealing with the teaching elder and the session and report the results of that work to the Committee of the Review of Presbytery Records for this General Assembly. So that's something that I'll be looking forward to see how they've dealt with that. They gave them at least 4 things that they needed to do, and it was a tight turnaround. I saw on Twitter, so you never know how reliable these things are, but someone alleging something happened in Columbus Metro Presbytery, and Columbus Metro Presbytery is slated to be dissolved at this General Assembly and merged into the Ohio Valley Presbytery. So this is another, as you pointed out, Billy, another moment just like that late Tuesday night for the Review of Presbytery Records report, which comes up usually on Wednesday, that we need to be ready and prepared for, because these are not insignificant matters. Y'all have any comments on RPR?
Well, I hope that, I just hope that this is dealt with well. I mean, we in North Texas Presbytery, we had a similar issue several years ago where there was a woman on staff at a PCA church who was, I mean, the session was claiming that she wasn't preaching, but she was, she was giving what would to outward appearances be a sermon, just not calling it a sermon, and so. That's not just restricted to New York. That church abruptly left the PCA. The pastor actually announced it in Presbytery, right in the middle of Presbytery, just said we're leaving, and people said, well, you can't actually just do that. But so that one I guess sort of resolved itself in an awkward way. But there's definitely a need to be clear on this.
Yes. And to the church, the credit of the church in New York where this took place, my understanding is that the teaching out of there has said, we have no intention of leaving, so they intend to uh, stick with the process, follow our polity to resolve this. And that's one of the nice things about our polity is that when it is violated, there's a method to get us back on track, to get us back into conformity with the vows that we've made and the polity that we've agreed to follow. So I think that's a great segue into Overture 3. This one is getting a lot of attention, and I think for all the wrong reasons. Overture 3 would make BCO Chapter 53 part of our Constitution. And right now it's just sort of there as pious advice. But what BCO 53, there's a slight change in this overture that would make it clear that a qualified man is the one that is doing the preaching. But that's already in our Constitution, right? So that's where all the focus is, all the fire, all the smoke without heat, or heat without light, whatever the metaphor is that I'm mixing, focusing on those 4 words that appear in 2 places. But what this does is unite us around what preaching is, or what this would do, and what a sermon must be. I mean, just if you don't mind, I'm going to read this, and if you do mind, I'm sorry. The subject of a sermon should be some verse or verses of Scripture. I mean, even in that first sentence, it just hits us like a ton of bricks. That preaching is different. Preaching is not, well, I saw this on the 700 Club, and I want to tell you about it. I mean, growing up in the mainline Lutheran church of all places, the preacher would from time to time give us just a summary report on what he watched on the 700 Club this week. And its object, the purpose of a sermon, is to explain, defend, and apply some part of the system of divine truth, or to point out the nature, the state, and bounds and obligation of some duty. A text should not merely be a motto. How often have we heard of that happen, where there'll be some civil event or some holiday, and there'll be some verse extracted and then expounded upon, and then the subject of the expounding is something completely different, but should fairly contain the doctrine proposed to be handled. So the text needs to relate to the sermon. It is proper that large portions be expounded and particularly improved for the instruction of the people in the meaning and use of the sacred scriptures. Why would we not want that part of our Constitution? I've heard very prominent speakers come at very significant PCA events where that was not done.
What's the argument against it?
What I've heard is that it's redundant because of the addition of qualified man. That's the only thing that I am hearing. Maybe y'all have heard others.
Well, Ryan, I would I would agree with you. Most of the conversation, especially early on, about this overture was focused on the 4 words, or a qualified man. And I think probably because when you get the overtures and you're reading through them, you're used to, when it's a proposed change to the BCO, you're used to looking for the underlying words, right?
Yes.
That's what you're trained to do. What's the change? And I agree with you, at least based on what I've seen, the change in the text of adding "or a qualified man," that's in other places in the BCO, and it's really, I mean, that's not the main issue, but yet it got all the attention, and people assume that was the issue. Let's deal with those 4 words, move on to the next overture. And you're right. The bigger issue is that Chapter 53 is not constitutional currently. I think that's the correct way to say it. And so, so the real question here is, should it be constitutional? And but it has been very confusing in most of the conversations I've been in, because we focused strictly on the qualified man thing, and not really had much of a conversation around, should Chapter 53 become constitutional?
Yeah, I would add that with you, Ryan, in agreement that this the issues that are the discussion point are obviously very important, but it's really great on the surface that we would have in our Constitution the definition of a sermon and what a sermon is, what its goal is, and how to be faithful to that. That's wonderful. That's good. And that's something that I'm fairly certain that if we were discussing and voting on our agreement of this across the PCA, the General Assembly, it might be a shutout of a vote. It could potentially, if you asked for 53-2 and just simply said, let's vote on do we agree with this? It might be 100% of the vote.
I would hope so.
I would think so. And that's good. And so, and if you wanted to put that as an internal, maybe even an invisible unity or a doctrinal unity, that's good. And what should come, though, is saying that's what a sermon is. But the second part of a sermon is who delivers the sermon. And so if we agree on what a sermon is, there should be agreement on the external part of a sermon. And the external part is who is qualified, or as the catechism, larger catechism says, who is approved, duly approved, I think that says. We should want to constitute that as well. Because the sermon is not effective simply because of the person doing it, performing or giving the sermon, but we should have an external unity on who is to do this thing, who is allowed, who is duly approved or qualified. And I think that it is right and is good and historic for Presbyterians to bring internal and external into unity insofar as we can. And this seems an easy thing to agree to preaching.
So, Job, what I've heard you say is we need unity on who's to do it. And what this would do is also what they are to do.
Yes.
Because right now, there's no definition. And actually what this chapter, if it were to be made constitutional, would give wider latitude than what BCO 53 already says, because BCO 53 is just the minister should apply himself, whereas this is the minister or a qualified man, a licentiate, a ruling elder, a seminary student can preach the word, it sounds like, whereas right now, a ruling elder can't preach. He can exhort, but he can't preach, and I don't know what the difference is between the two, but we need unity on both who can do it, and that's already within our Constitution. So I think we can just take all of those arguments and just set them aside, because that's not changing a single thing. Now, maybe some of the whereas clauses are a little bit imbalanced on that, and that's what I see Howie Donahoe points out in his GA study guide, as it were. But these other paragraphs would be so helpful for us to unite around what we are doing on a Lord's Day morning.
But think of the alternative. How odd would it be, and how odd would it be if we were to say, is it paragraph 6 where the qualified man portion starts? I believe it is, if we were to constitute it as is. No, it's 4. I'm sorry. It's 4.
It's 1 and 4. Yeah.
Yes. How odd would it be if we constituted the parts that don't speak of, if we constituted the parts about preaching, but not the parts about a qualified man? Now, I know that's not the overture, but imagine if that's what we did. We said, well, this is constitutional, but this is not. It kind of guts it in many ways. Makes it feel like, why is that not constituted? What is that saying about what does that say about us? In some ways, you could say.
Well, and I think what the discussion and has helped me to see is it doesn't matter whether qualified man is in there or not, because that's already in BCO 12. So maybe somebody at Overtures should make an amendment to just go back to the as is BCO 53 and put that in there, and I'd vote for that.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, again, I need to do it. This is another item I need to do even a little more personal research on, because obviously chapter 53 is there. Doesn't have the same status, right? And I don't know, Ryan, or some of you others have done the research to say, years ago, why was chapter 53 originally? I'm sure there was a great discussion about it. And that's one of the things I have on my list to go back and do some personal research on. Because on the face of it, I don't have an issue with it, but I do want to educate myself a little bit on what were some of the historical arguments, because sometimes I just miss things.
Yeah, Jared Nelson has published an article on the Directory of Worship, the founder's unfinished work, and I think there was some disagreement over what needs to go in there and how, and so they just said, let's make those 3 chapters constitutional, and we'll come back and finish this. And they tried, but it's a lot of work, as we're seeing. Well, anything else on Overture 3?
It seems like the claim that it's redundant to say a qualified man, I mean, that's formally true, but at the same time, I can't see why that should be a problem. Saying it again, if that's your only objection, is that it's already there, then I wouldn't think you'd have an objection to it in general, because it's already there. So I don't really know why you would see that as being so vital to remove that language. Let's just have it in there twice, and it says the same thing. And if we're completely comfortable with that fact, only a qualified man can do this, a minister or a qualified man, then the redundancy itself shouldn't really be an issue. It seems like you could just accept that and should be fine.
Yeah. If that's your objection, then item 2 is redundant, because our Constitution already requires a man to exhibit chastity in his character, convictions, and conduct in the larger catechism. So,
Right.
I don't know why yes, I don't understand the opposition to redundancy, especially since there would be so much that would be added to this.
And it keeps the I don't know what the word is, Ryan, but the session ultimately is going to discern and determine what qualified is, right? Within the context, of course, the standards in the BCO. But in other words, if someone could say, well, who determines what qualified is? We've not changed that. That stays the same.
Yeah. That's a good latitude for the session.
Something that came to mind too is these the redundancy thing keeps coming up, because it came up on the sexuality standards as well, that it was redundant. But it's interesting that you always hear the redundancy thing when it's those issues that are the main pressure points in our day: sexuality, men and women, whether what is the role of a woman in the life of the church. It's the cultural pressure points. And so people will say, well, it's just redundant, and maybe not recognize that in those cultural pressure points, we have to be more careful, and we have to be more explicit, and we have to be more precise, precisely because they are under attack in our culture. And so to say that it's redundant, and you can just say, well, okay, let's just let it be redundant. We have to make absolutely sure, that we are being as careful as we possibly can on those issues, because those are the issues that are being attacked in our world. No one's questioning huge amounts of our Constitution in our society, and so there's no need to be extra careful in those areas, because no one disputes it.
That's a very good point, and especially in our postmodern situation where people are playing language games, and well, this isn't preaching, this is just teaching. We need that extra clarity, and that's what good teachers do. Right? Didn't Jesus teach the same thing in different ways, using different words? And I was an education major for a few years in college, and that was something that they hammered home: repeat, repeat, repeat. So why not in our Constitution? Redundancy isn't the unpardonable sin.
And again, it lines it up with the wording of chapter 12, which is already in the BCO.
Yeah. So that's not the controversial portion. Isn't actually new. Shouldn't be the controversy. Maybe it's just the whereas clauses create a storm where they shouldn't be. But remember, the whereas clauses, they disappear.
That's
they
right.
go. They're gone. They're not adopted.
Nobody reads those. So.
The what?
Nobody reads those.
Reads what?
the whereas clause. I'm just kidding.
What are those? I'm sorry.
We're joking at each other and not even realizing what we're doing.
Well, continuing in the vein of personnel, so this is the Polity, Procedure, and Personnel Assembly. Continuing in the vein of personnel, the RUF affiliation agreement. Last year, there was much to do about, can the permanent committee just impose an affiliation agreement, or is this a material change that needs to come before the assembly? And the assembly said, this is a material change. It needs to come before us, so we'll talk to you next year about it. And we have it. We have the proposal from the permanent committee, which must be approved by the General Assembly because we are a Presbyterian denomination. And one of the concerns of the affiliation agreement is who has the authority over the campus minister. And you could get different answers based on who the area coordinator is. You can get different answers based on the previous affiliation agreements, which were not standardized. And so what this affiliation agreement would do is standardize that. And it's a complex system because RUF is a many $1 million institution organization with locations throughout the country. There are literally dozens of them. But it allows the final authority regarding the transfer, removal, termination, and or dissolution of the call of a campus minister shall be made by the presbytery in coordination with RUF. So to fire, the presbytery is the one who does that, it sounds like to me. But if there's a personnel issue, the Lawrenceville office or the regional coordinator, area coordinator for RUF would have the ability to suspend administratively to allow for an investigation. What have you all heard about the RUF agreement, and what are your thoughts?
Well, Ryan, I'll tell you, I think if first thing we have to do is step back to some of the first things you said, which is the old method, which was multiple agreements with different language. At least me personally, that needed to be repaired. I didn't even realize we were there. So I think that the first objective of getting a standard agreement across all presbyteries, I find that to be a really worthy goal. So we don't need to lose sight of that. I do think the correct decision was made last year that this needs to go through the process. So praise the Lord, it's going through the process. The other thing that I have found encouraging between the document that was produced last year and now, all the feedback I've gotten from friends around is that RUF has been very open to feedback and input. They didn't just hunker down and say, what we have is what we're going with. They heard people's conversations and were willing to take suggested edits and to work through those. And so I've been very happy with RUF's goal of getting a standard agreement and their willingness to take feedback from folks from several presbyteries around on ways to improve and make the agreement clearer. Like I told you earlier, I haven't yet read it. That's on my list of things to do is to read over the agreement. But I am excited about where we are and like I said, the RUF's willingness to take input, to seriously consider it. So I don't think we need to fly past those important steps that have been taken.
Yeah, I love seeing our principles come into play.
Yeah.
That we are a grassroots Presbyterian denomination, that are the leaders of our agencies, their staff, the head of staff is a coordinator, right? Mm-hmm. He's not a president. He's not a chief executive. He's a coordinator. He's a chief administrator. And I think we saw the cash value of that kind of denomination at play last year, and we see the fruit of it. The investments are coming, the dividends of that at this assembly. One other thing I found interesting about this is that area coordinators will be teaching elders. In in the past, they've had ruling elders as area coordinators. And I don't know if maybe that will get changed at the last minute, but that was interesting to me that it seems like they want area coordinators to be teaching elders. I know the RUF national coordinator is a ruling elder
Mm-hmm.
now currently. So I would be curious to know why that was put in there, specified, but that's just interesting to me, and maybe only to me. I don't know.
That is interesting. I'd be curious to. It seems like there's probably some good logic for it, but it does seem like an interesting restriction.
There's a number of things in here that I think I want some clarity on, and the part of RUF and in coordination with RUF over the dissolution, termination, and calls and such, of how is that going to work, and is it a change from practice? Is it constituting practice, as you will? What does that mean, and how is the process to go from one to the other? It does fit with, I think you've said before, Ryan, the principle of working together from one court to the other and such. It fits there. But there's just some things in it that I would be curious to know about, who's determining the call and who has the approval versus who can be up for approval as a candidate. Those are the questions I would like to hear discussed, and I'm assuming that's going to come out throughout, whether it be in the committee of commissioners and then on the floor. I assume we'll all know more details of how is that going to work. Is RUF going to be able to direct who are candidates? Is the presbytery? What if there's a disagreement? Those are the kind of things that for me, I want to know, because eventually there's going to be, at some point, there could be a hang up. How are we supposed to work through that?
Right. And that's why we need it in writing, because for
Yes.
99.7 of instances, there's no problem. We probably don't even need a written agreement. But it's for those 0.3% of cases where we need to have written procedures set down in stone, or at least on paper, for this is what we're going to do in this situation. And I think this is helpful here. All campus personnel, so that's the ordained as well as unordained, will be legal employees of RUF, supervised by an area coordinator, paid through RUF, subject to RUF employment procedures. Ordained personnel will be trained, employed, assessed by RUF, but members of the local presbytery. And the presbytery provides that shepherding care, and the ecclesiastical authority, which is only ministerial and declarative, lies with the presbytery. So if there's a discipline case, that comes to the presbytery, but that also doesn't prevent the employer from dealing with a discipline case. But as we saw under paragraph RR, that's the pirate paragraph, I suppose. I'm sorry. I got a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old at home.
That was tough, man.
Oh, yeah.
In the pirate paragraph, the final decision whether to fire him will come to the presbytery, but they have to coordinate with RUF. And I think if RUF is serious enough about this man needs to go, we have cause. I don't think a court will disagree with them. At least in 99.9% of cases. And I know there have been situations in my own presbytery where there was a man called by RUF or called by the presbytery to serve as an RUF minister, and RUF in Lawrenceville got wind of some things, and just seemed like in between presbytery meetings he was just gone. And now he's doing campus ministry in the same city at the same university for a different Presbyterian denomination. But our presbytery actually sent an overture up requesting guidance on, was this legal? We asked the Committee on Constitutional Business for guidance, and I don't remember what their response was, but it seems like things have been set in motion to get a more clear path for what happens, when, why, and how, and who does it.
Ryan, Job mentioned, I think, an important thing, especially when you think about encouraging folks to come to General Assembly to participate. because I had put it on my calendar for this GA. The RUF Committee of Commissioners meeting, I believe, is 1 o'clock Monday afternoon of GA. Now that's early. Realize some folks may not be in town at that time, but my plan is to go and attend, sit in the back. I'm not on that committee of commissioners, but I think it would be if somebody is going to be in Richmond Monday afternoon and you have an interest, that's going to be a great place to come. And I think hear a lot of the detailed questions, or I would hope that committee of commissioners talks through a lot of these topics. And so I just encourage folks, if you're in Richmond Monday afternoon and you have an interest, that's a great opportunity to come and just sit in the back of the room and listen and learn. So.
Yeah, I'm on the Overtures Committee, so I can't be there, but if I would encourage a committee of commissioners member, and if it comes to the floor, just to say clarity on, gatekeeping process of how, not just in the calling, but who are the candidates? I think that's something that I want to know, because there are going to be multiple people, and RUF is a desirable position of ministry for a lot of men that that could be ordained, and I think that there needs to be for it to work for the presbytery and the RUF committee. We need to know, it needs to be clear of that. Yes, there's process, but we need to know that someone's not overruled from the get-go. That there's real coordination between RUF at national and the presbytery on not just calling, but finding candidates.
Yeah, that seems like a really important point. In my experience, presbytery is always involved in the actual call and the examination, but it would be really easy for there to be almost no oversight in how candidates are assessed to begin with, and it's all I get the impression that we don't even really know who the candidates are until they've already been put forward, and so it would be easy for there not to be any involvement of presbytery at the very beginning, and that seems like something we need to deal with.
That would be problematic.
And it actually could go the other way, that RUF, meaning it could be place to place and situation to situation, where even to the point of where RUF is like, you just tell us whoever you got and we'll send them through the assessment and it goes. I'm not accusing or saying anyone's going to do that, but we want to ensure that there is real assessment and work at both ends to ensure that not just of the final approval, but of finding candidates. That to me is a real important issue.
Yeah, very much so. It's interesting in this agreement. This is the paragraph RN, which I don't have on the screen, but RUF shall support the presbytery in holding ordained campus personnel accountable for their vows and views as acceptable locally in the Presbyterian Church in America, which I think is an important aspect of this new agreement or potential new agreement, that there may be some views that are acceptable in Tennessee Valley Presbytery, but might not be acceptable in Northwest Georgia Presbytery, where you are, Job. And RUF is not just to impose some guy. Lawrenceville is not just been able to impose some guy on the presbytery, that they need to find campus ministers whose views are in line with the median of the presbytery, at least. I would think that is what it means.
Aren't we keeping with preliminary principles of each court has the right to determine its members, that they can't be violated?
Right. And I think this agreement attempts to thread that needle.
I think that's the goal. I'm with you. What about those 0.3 times? We need to make sure that it's ready for that situation.
Yeah, because that's the only time we're going to need these agreements is in the hard cases. Just like the rules of discipline, we only need them when it gets hard. So we need to follow them when it's easy, so that it's so that we can not hurt people's rights, which are the crown rights of Christ.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's see. So we're dealing with personnel. The nominating committee report is a massively important time to be at General Assembly. That will be, at least at the docket I'm looking at now, the most current docket. And of course, you can still amend the docket on Tuesday night. So to a point that Billy has made a number of times, make sure that you're there
Yeah.
on Tuesday. But 9:30 on Thursday is the nominating committee report. It's an order of the day. And so it will preempt anything else that's going on at that time. But that's when we vote on the men who will serve as permanent committee members of MTW, M&A, Covenant College, Covenant Seminary, retirement and benefit. Well, I think it's Geneva Benefits now, PCA Foundation. So that's they're setting the trajectory for the denomination. They are the ones supervising these coordinators of the agencies.
Hey, Ryan, can I just add one thing to on that?
Please.
I would say I did my own little homemade workshop, GA, for some guys. And so if you've not been, or you need to remember this, that this is sort of an all-encompassing part where Billy was saying, like, you need to be there. But the thing to remember about this part is that there's no discussion and the voting is quick. So the research you do before to know who the men are is important, and to know you've got two options. And so you want to know going in who you're going to vote for, because you don't have any time really in the moment to decide. So be there and you must be prepared if you want to participate in that well, because you will vote, they will announce it, and we will move to the next one and do that until we're done. And it's a lot.
Yeah. That's a great point, Job. I have trouble just keeping up when I'm circling who's been elected.
Yes.
It's 45 seconds for each race, so to speak.
Yeah.
You've got to know going in. So talk to people. And this is, by the way, this is on Thursday. So you will have had the GRN supper where you can ask people. You will have the Grimke Seminary American Reformer. What is that? Dessert? Is it a dessert?
It's drinks and
Social.
Snacks. Yeah, social.
Soiree. So you'll have the American Reformer soiree, and then you will have the More in the PCA Ruling Elder Network shindig.
That's right.
Where, hey, if you don't know, hey, there's Jay Bruce is running for SJC. Is he a good guy? I don't know. Should I vote for him or should I vote for the floor nominee? Just to decide an example at random.
The other important part of that is getting your clicker sitting somewhere where you're close enough so your clicker consistently works.
That's hugely important.
Yes.
Maybe I'm sorry, Billy, go ahead.
Maybe we could come up with, Ryan, you could come up with a T-shirt, my clicker worked, or I don't know.
If you're disturbed by people yelling out in the crowd, that is not the you're going to have to really get prepared, because clicker not working.
Yes.
The yelling increases at that point.
Yeah.
It's always fun.
And to the logistical concerns about this, don't show up at 9:27 and expect to find a good seat. And especially if you're teaching out or you're being paid to be there, all of your expenses are probably being paid. Ruling elders, you're probably taking vacation time. But I have noticed, at least, my ruling elders, when they rarely go to that exhibit hall. I'll be in the exhibit hall more than they will. They are there. They are engaged. And I'm trying to come up with office supplies for the next year from the exhibit hall. But I'm saving the church money on pens. But
thanks to Covenant College, I can clothe my children.
Yeah, feeding and clothing our kids. And sometimes there's some good cookies that I'll bring back and snacks. But part of this particular report is be in an area, be there at 9 so that you can get a seat where you're already, maybe there's been some test votes on a permanent committee report, so that you can hit that sensor. That's good. And then there'll be the election of the stated clerk. Normally, that is something of a snooze fest. That won't come during the nominating committee report, but you can make floor nominees for the stated clerk. The stated clerk vote will come up during the administrative committee report. Since the retirement of Roy Taylor, that's become more interesting, at least in terms of a vote. I don't know of any attempts to have another nominee, but that will be one that I'll be wanting to watch to see if there are speeches for or against there. Do y'all have any comments about the nominating report or the election of a state clerk?
I have a procedural question. Made me think of you just.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Suppose someone voted, or the body voted, to not approve the state clerk to remain in his position. Can you bring a floor nomination? And supposing they want to make a floor nomination for a new person, and they get it in the deadline. Does that vote, and we voted in the nominating committee, does that person that's floor nominated and up for election, would he get that right away?
My understanding is that if there are floor nominees for the state clerk, those will go to the administrative committee. And if there are floor nominees for the state clerk, the administrative committee may have to reconvene to consider those. The administrative committee committee of commissioners as well. But if there were floor nominees, and if the floor nominee were to prevail in that election, he would have to be examined by the Theological Examining Committee, which all level 1 employees of the nomination have to be already. But theoretically, now this has never been done, but theoretically, there is a path for this.
Could you do that if someone? I guess I'm asking timeline. And by the way, I'm not asking because I'm planning on running this plan. I'm just curious.
It's fun, we're PCA pastors. Well, what is the polity and what's the constitutional?
Well, I guess I was wondering
hypothetically,
if we approved him before, but yet someone wanted to make a nomination, is that nomination not possible? I'm just curious.
Ryan, if you remember, I think it was Birmingham, GA. The report that came to the assembly was you had the statement from the AC that had been approved by the Committee of Commissioners to reelect the stated clerk. That was bundled in the group of recommendations that would just be handled kind of in omnibus, whatever the right term is. The first thing that happened was somebody stood and removed that from the group, so it wasn't handled just with the group. And so there was a separate vote on just that one item. And I think somebody else stood and requested that it not just be a voice vote. And so everybody got to use their clicker. Now, in that case, the majority still approved the recommendation from the committee. I think, Job, to your question, what if the vote had not been that way? What would be the next step? Because I think the RAO says you would take nominations. Does it? So I don't know that it would necessarily have to be confined to somebody who had been previously nominated, before that vote took place. That's again, I don't know that we've done this before. So I don't know if there would be an opportunity for people to make nominations at that point, because before that point, I'm not sure.
The only time I don't think we have, but I remember in was it David Hall's book, there was like a discussion about Morton Smith at some point about him saying no. I don't remember how that went down though, but it seems like there was some controversy.
There was at one point where there were 4 nominees for stated clerk.
Okay.
And I think that was after Morton Smith had announced his retirement. Okay. And then they said, "Do you really want to retire?" And he said, "Well, no, not really." But it was after the RPCES came in and there was some issue. And so he said, "Well, okay, I'll serve for one more year." And they elected him for one more year. And then
I think that's what I'm thinking of.
But so we really haven't had, but yes, during this election will take place during the administrative committee report, not during nominating committee. Mm-hmm. But as I understand it, you can use a floor nominee form to fill out. Now, if the administrative committee recommendation were voted down, then there would be all chaos, because you're just having to take nominees directly from the floor without a form, as I understand it. But this is all hypothetical.
And just as an aside, that's that process is the same for all the coordinators.
Well, I don't
Is it?
believe so.
Oh,
I
it's
think
not right. Oh,
only
I'm
the
sorry.
stated clerk can be nominated from the floor because he works for the General Assembly in a different way
Right.
than the president of Geneva Benefits does.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was saying something different. In
Oh,
other words, we do vote to approve each coordinator.
Yes.
So when
yes.
MTW comes up, M&A, RUF, et cetera,
Yes,
their
yes.
approval is there. So you could, if you wanted to, take out each one and rather than vote in the omnibus, which is typically what happens, but you do have the time to vote for their approval individually if you wanted to. That's all I
That's
was
right.
saying.
That's
Yeah.
right. I'm sorry. Yes, I misunderstood. Yes, you would. And that's
Well,
again
and
our grassroots polity.
Yeah.
yeah, and you've got the other issue, as far as you kind of probably need a stated clerk if you're going to process through the workings of the assembly because they have a lot of duties to do. So you kind of have
Yes.
to deal with the topic. You can't just wait
Yes.
and wait and wait.
Right. All right, well, that takes us to the end of our personnel portion. We spend a lot of time dealing with procedure on other in other media. The big, I think, what will be the most hotly debated. I don't believe it'll be contentious, but I think it will be debated well. I hope well. Is the matter of atheist testimony, and we've considered this a number of times, both on this program as well as others. So I'm not going to say that everything's been said, but certainly everyone hasn't said it. Anybody have anything to add on either overtures 1 or 18?
That hasn't already been said.
I don't know if it's been said, but it is interesting how important this was in the political realm in American history as well. That this is something that you would have agreement both in church and state, that if someone is not bound by oath to God, they're not reliable. And that's something that you've seen throughout American history as well, that they recognize that how important that was, because otherwise they really have no reason to tell the truth. I don't know if people have talked about that or not, but I just find that to be interesting how much agreement there is on that.
Yes, I think some state constitutions or state books of laws still have that. It's on the books, even
Yeah.
if it can't be enforced. They've maybe out of principle not repealed it. That if you don't acknowledge your creator, and my concern with creating these special promises for atheists is we are giving some level of credence to their delusion. Right? If you are an atheist, right, and the bar to testify in the PCA is very low, right? You can't be an atheist, you can't be a universalist, you can't be mentally incompetent, and you can't be too young. But as long as those 4 things don't apply to you, they have to admit you as a witness at least. And so if you're one who says, "Well, I don't believe that there's a God," well, you're deluding yourself. Why would the church want to accommodate that delusion, which is blasphemy?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I have some pragmatic concerns that may
Yeah.
not be real, but I think they're worth considering. I know that a lot of the discussion of atheists in the witnesses have to do with some desire, if there's really horrendous things going on, where an atheist could be helpful. And I understand that and know that if you could get that, if there's something they can offer and it's helpful, principally, I get it. You would want to find out what you could if they could help. But a lot of times, the examples that are given have been over things that would be of legal matter in the civil realm. So we could, on the one hand, say, okay, but we could get that another way. And in fact, if it's a civil issue where there could be jail and fines and such, that's going to go through the civil magistrate. And once that's done, the church could give an ecclesiastical ruling. Fair enough. My question would be, what do we do, or what is the circumstances? Are there circumstances where there's not legal civil issue, it is interchurch ecclesiastical matters, where an atheist testimony come in. So if a discipline case comes in where someone could say, I'm an atheist and I can speak to this matter as a credible witness over something that happened that is only confined to the church and its membership in the church and whatnot. That to me is a question. What are those examples? Where are we having that problem where this shores up? But then it could open up another part that it worries me. If someone would come in and we could say they're credible, why? Well, they're in a realm of social work or psychology or whatever it might be. And they could say, well, they're a credible witness because they have credentialing in areas such as this of helping and dealing with people. And they could come in and say, well, this person's been accused of A. In my field, that is an actual problem. But so if they would say this is an abuse case against someone, and they say, well, I'm not a Christian, I'm an atheist, but I know what abuse looks like. And they can come in and render a verdict, or excuse me, render a witness against this person, and yet they're not a Christian. I find that to be something that it could be troubling. It could be very problematic if that door is open, where we allow not just, you say, well, we could do that now, maybe. But again, if they're a Christian, that changes things. I'm skeptical that opening that possibility up is helpful.
Job, that's an outstanding point. Do you all remember there was a minister in St. Louis who is no longer in the PCA? He wrote a book, and he did some videos. They were on Twitter. Maybe you didn't watch them, but
What's Twitter?
Twitter, yeah. But one of the issues that he highlighted was, if you have a person who has this certain specific sinful temptation, that it would be spiritual abuse for the church to call that person to repentance. And I think, Job, along the lines of what you've been saying, that's an excellent example of, we don't want someone from outside the church to be defining what abuse is. Just like we didn't want that individual defining what spiritual abuse is, calling people to repent of their sinful temptations, their unnatural, disordered desires. If you think that's spiritual abuse, I don't want to have any advice from you. I don't want any testimony from you.
Yes, I think that this is, again, you can always say, well, is that going to happen? I want to shore up things and think we need to really consider the consequences and the fallout. And if we open up to allowing anyone to come in, it opens up I think very easily in a credential-driven society to allow people with credentials in the civil realm not bad because it's in the civil realm, but who could have views of theology, religion, and God that go are totally counter to how we understand things, and come in and define. Church discipline is not viewed positively in our current context. It's not generally that way. And so if we want to look to outside sources and say, well, they know what abuse is, we're not good at handling abuse, or we're not good at this or that, or we're not good at fill in the blank, let's bring this person in, and now they're going to guide us and how we should understand. They could potentially guide us in that and give us direction. And then that's going to create a bigger firestorm when we disagree with it, or if we disagree with it, which would go up. And then you're going to be bringing in for court rules against what they said. You could say, not only is that person abusive, or not only is that person that court was. And then this could create more problems.
Yeah, to Job's point, this is one of the biggest concerns I have with these proposed changes, but just kind of this general tendency of issues related to abuse. There is a lot of really bad thinking in the world. I was going to say secular thinking. I don't believe it's wrong because it's secular, but really worldly and unbiblical thinking that is making inroads in our world, in our circles. For instance, like the book, The Body Keeps the Score, things like that, where I've seen people, maybe primarily lay people in the PCA, who have accepted these ideas that I can have suppressed trauma in my life that I don't even know about. I don't even remember the events. I don't know about it, but somehow it's become aware. I've become aware of it, and people are then actually making accusations about people based on something they can't even remember, and they're using that book, "The Body Keeps the Score," as the scientific proof that this happens, and this is really bad and really dangerous, and that kind of thinking is widely accepted in the psychological world, that you can essentially have trauma in your body. You don't even know about it. You don't even know what caused it because you've suppressed it. And then that can be used to make accusations against people that can be taken as actually legitimate in certain settings. And that's devastating, and it will be. And those people are considered credentialed, credible witnesses in the wider world.
And this is a Ryan. I think we talked about this with George many podcasts back. It's a ecosystem changing move. It's changing the ecosystem of how we do discipline. Now, is that good? It's not just simply saying we're doing the same thing we've always been doing with this additional part. No, this additional part, by definition, will change the system and the ecosystem of how discipline operates. And not changing the ecosystem is not principally a bad thing, but it needs to be thought through. And I don't believe that this, if we need to make adjustments, we can talk about it, yes, but I think that this is not a good change. And I appreciate what they're trying to do. I don't think it's malicious. I don't agree with it, but I think that we need to reject this. This is my opinion. And maybe I shouldn't say that, Ryan, because I'm on the overtures committee, but I don't know if I don't know. Take it
Well,
out.
it's the
Okay,
principles that you're rejecting, I think.
Yes, I'm rejecting it on principle.
Well,
And
there
what,
is the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you.
Well, I mean, the fundamental principle on this actual point is people maybe don't like to say this bluntly, but atheists are not reliable witnesses because they will not submit themselves to God. They by definition, that's why it's in our Constitution, and it was there for a good reason. And shouldn't, I mean, that alone is enough for me to not change it.
Yeah. And something you pointed out a moment ago, Dr. Dunson, is that with the body being the score of this trauma or unsuppressed trauma, we also have, if this were to be passed, there's a perfect storm because we have removed our statute of limitations. So some psychiatrists, psychologists could implant a memory in someone of something that happened 20 years ago that actually didn't happen, but it's an implanted memory by a psychologist or psychiatrist. Well, then the church court has to not only weigh the lack of evidence, but the time, that there's discretion to the court to determine, has too much time passed. It used to be there, we had a 1 year statute of limitations. And I think that we removed our statute of limitations because we were concerned about abuse. But I think we were reacting to abuse. We weren't actually considering and weighing the principles. And that may be something we need to revisit and get our statute of limitations back. Maybe make it 5 years, maybe not just 1 year like it used to be. But we need to have some clear line where the court doesn't just have latitude to make these determinations.
Yeah, because that's actually a fundamental point of justice. That's why statutes of limitations exist. You can tweak them, but they exist in order to maintain justice. They're not just pragmatic guidelines.
Yeah. Well, anything else that y'all want to discuss about this upcoming General Assembly?
Whatever you
I can't
want.
think of anything.
Okay. Well, anybody have anything you're particularly excited about this GA or for the PCA that we haven't talked about as we bring it in?
I'll just be curious to know what attendance will be like. I get this impression that people see this as being like not nearly as consequential as some of the last years. But I think Billy made the point that he had seen numbers roughly the same, maybe. So I'm just curious about how that'll turn out.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything. I've just heard a couple of people comment that their understanding was registration was approaching what it was last year, which would be good because
Yeah.
I agree with you, Ben. I mean, um, it's the reality when you have kind of a red hot issue that has stirred everybody up. You know, you can expect a few more folks to show up. What we hope to get to is this is this is something everybody wants to come to, whether
This
there's
is
a
just
red
a
hot
life
issue or
cycle.
not, right? Yeah, this is just the right thing to do. But
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that there will be good attendance. I don't know that it will be the same numbers that you saw in Birmingham, uh,
Yeah.
but I'm hopeful that it will be similar to last year.
I've heard that ruling elder registration is approaching 30%. So, and that they were anticipating more than 2,000
Yeah.
registrants. So that's getting up to near where they were in Memphis. But Birmingham was certainly extraordinary. Maybe we should have General Assembly in Birmingham every year. I like that. It's about an hour and a half from where I
Yeah.
live, and I don't have to be at the host presbytery. So
Yeah. Well, Chattanooga next year will be close for you as well, so not too bad.
that'll be very close.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now that big attendance, you have to get to the ice cream social quickly.
You and Ben Ratliff, all about the ice cream social.
Yeah, I do like ice cream.
Yeah, I would always say that, with every GA, I'm still fairly new to the PCA and all things considered. But just reading some of the history and stuff, I always say just, don't sleep on a year and think, oh, there's not much going on. The things are important. Things are always, every year to year, the important things, or the things that come up and we're talking about must be important because they come forward. There's I read a book once on William Taft, the president, and his
The
big
one
issue
stuck in a
was,
bathtub, right?
yeah, I think he was a large man. But he had like one of his biggest things that he was dealing with was like silver, which seems completely foreign to us. But, I'm sure it has effects and had effects for time going forward. So, this is a William Taft type General Assembly. Don't sleep on it. It is important, just because it doesn't seem like something you would really care about.
There seems to be a law of human history that when any institution has some sort of victory, or maybe just put it say they've done something good, they've accomplished something good. I think the PCA has been doing good things in the last few years. There's a tendency to take it easy once
Mhm.
you've accomplished that, and it happens so often that any achievements are actually overturned and reversed in the subsequent years because people they're not vigilant. That seems to be just a repeating pattern throughout history, and it's just an unfortunate reality you have to be careful about.
Yeah, getting momentum is easy. Maintaining momentum is hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's perhaps why there are so many exhortations to watchfulness and
Mhm.
holding fast to the truth, contending for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. Well, that's a very good exhortation to leave off on. Thank you, Dr. Dunson. Thank you, Dr. Ball and Dr. Dalomba. See, everybody gets a doctorate when you come on the. Some of you have earned doctorates and came with them, but everybody you get an honorary doctorate here. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
Enjoyed
you.
it.
Look forward to seeing y'all in Richmond.
Yep. Same.
Hi, this is Thermo Beasy. Thanks for joining the conversation, which is on the Westminster Standard.
The Westminster Standard is the podcast of Jude 3. For additional resources or to make a donation, visit our website, jude3pca.org. As a reminder, the opinions and views expressed on the Westminster Standard podcast are not necessarily those of Jude 3 and the PCA. On this program, we try to bring you a variety of perspectives, and we do not edit our guests for content, but hope to foster greater dialogue and understanding as we promote the historic, old-school Reformed faith in the Presbyterian Church in America. Remember to subscribe and share this podcast as we continue to offer preparation for the General Assembly meeting June 10th through 14th in Richmond, Virginia. I'll be back next week and talk to you then. Thank you.